Ethan Caldwell often told himself his life was predictable in the best possible way. A steady job, a comfortable home, and a wife who had once been his closest confidant gave him the kind of stability his younger self had dreamed about. Yet lately, when he looked at Rachel across the dinner table, he saw more distance than closeness. Her eyes, once quick to light with amusement at his remarks, now lingered on her phone, or on the blank wall beyond him. Conversations were efficient, almost transactional, and when they did brush against tenderness, the moments felt rehearsed, hollow. Ethan never admitted it aloud, but in the quiet hours he recognized how much of their marriage had settled into routine without passion. Lucas Grayson was the opposite of routine. He was unpredictable, magnetic in a way that made even silence around him feel alive. Ethan had known him since their college days, when Lucas's bold laughter and effortless charm had drawn crowds, while Ethan had watched from the edges, secretly intoxicated by the energy his friend carried so easily. The years had softened Lucas only slightly. He was still the kind of man who filled a room without trying. Ethan valued that energy more than he ever confessed, because it reminded him of something he had lost in himself. That Friday night had begun innocently. Daniel Harper, another mutual friend, had organized a small gathering to catch up, a chance for the old group to laugh about memories they kept retelling. Drinks flowed, stories stretched long into the evening, and by the time Daniel left, Lucas had nowhere to go but Ethan's place. It wasn't unusual. Lucas often crashed there when the night ran too late. Rachel, however, had excused herself early. Claiming fatigue, she kissed Ethan lightly on the cheek and slipped into the guest room, leaving the living room to him and Lucas. Ethan watched her go, guilt nibbling faintly at him. He had wanted her to stay, to laugh with them, to remind him of what they once were together. Instead, her retreat underscored the separation he tried not to acknowledge. Alone now, Lucas sprawled comfortably on the couch, his long frame relaxed, a glass in hand. "Your wife keeps an early schedule," he teased, though the remark carried no malice. "She's been tired lately," Ethan said, too quickly. He didn't want to explain the cracks in his marriage, not even to Lucas. Or maybe especially not to him. They talked in circles after that, old times, mutual friends, half-remembered pranks from their college dorms. Yet beneath the surface of the easy conversation, Ethan felt the air tighten, as if the laughter carried an undercurrent neither dared to name. Lucas's gaze lingered too long, his grin curving into something private. Ethan told himself it was the alcohol, the hour, the shadows stretching across the walls. When midnight finally pressed its weight against them, Lucas leaned back and said, "Guess I should crash here." His tone was casual, but his eyes searched Ethan's face as if expecting hesitation. "You know you're always welcome," Ethan replied. It was true. Lucas had stayed before, without incident. But as the words left his mouth, Ethan sensed something different in the night. The spare room was already occupied by Rachel, so the arrangement was simple. Ethan's bed was large enough for two. They had shared space before, camping trips, cramped hotel rooms during road trips. Nothing unusual. Nothing to explain. Still, as Ethan pulled back the covers and slid in beside Lucas, he felt a weight in his chest that hadn't been there on those earlier nights. Lucas smelled faintly of cologne and whiskey, his warmth radiating across the narrow space between them. Ethan lay rigid, listening to the rhythm of his own breathing, too aware of every small shift of the mattress. "Still can't fall asleep early, can you?" Lucas whispered after a while, voice low in the dark. "Guess not," Ethan answered, keeping his tone even. The quiet stretched. Ethan's eyes traced the ceiling, though he could barely make out its contours. He wondered if Lucas's hand, resting carelessly at his side, would drift. Wondered if it would mean anything if it did. He scolded himself for even entertaining the thought, but once it had formed, it refused to leave. His marriage vows rose unbidden in his mind, Rachel's laughter on their wedding day echoing faintly like a sound carried from another life. Yet the room he was in now, the body lying beside him, felt more immediate, more real than the promises he was straining to remember. Lucas shifted closer, not quite touching, but enough that Ethan felt the press of possibility. He held his breath, waiting, both terrified and compelled. The night offered no answers. Only the tension of unspoken things, thick in the silence between them. Ethan shut his eyes, hoping for sleep, but the racing of his heart betrayed him. This was not the same as all the other times they had shared a bed. He knew, without knowing why, that something had changed. And as Lucas's quiet breathing filled the dark, Ethan realized he wasn't sure whether he wanted to resist it or surrender. Ethan lay stiff beneath the covers, the faint hum of the ceiling fan filling the silence. The room was cloaked in shadow, broken only by a thin shaft of streetlight seeping through the curtains. He could hear Lucas's steady breathing, a rhythm so near it felt like a tide pulling him closer. Every small movement carried significance, the shift of fabric, the rustle of the sheets, the subtle warmth radiating from Lucas's body that he tried to focus on the ordinary, the creak of the house settling, the faint echo of a car passing outside. But his attention returned, again and again, to the man beside him. Lucas wasn't asleep. Ethan sensed it in the irregularity of his breaths, as if Lucas too was waiting for something unnamed to surface. A low whisper cut the dark. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Lucas's tone was careful, neither casual nor heavy, but threaded with a suggestion Ethan could not ignore. "Different how?" Ethan asked, his voice tighter than intended. Lucas gave a quiet laugh, the kind that masked more than it revealed. "Life. Choices. Who we ended up with." He paused. "Who we didn't." Ethan swallowed hard. He thought of Rachel in the guest room, asleep behind a closed door. Her absence pressed on him like a weight. "I don't usually let myself go there," he answered, though the words rang hollow. Silence followed, but it wasn't empty. Lucas shifted, turning on his side to face him. Ethan felt the brush of a knee against his thigh, the unsteady pause before Lucas withdrew, or didn't. It was subtle, almost deniable. Yet Ethan's body registered it as deliberate, a test that he forced himself to remain still, torn between the instinct to pull back and the desperate curiosity to see what might happen if he didn't. The conflict roared in him, sharper than any conversation he'd had in months. "You're tense," Lucas murmured. His hand moved slightly, grazing the sheet near Ethan's hip as if adjusting his position. The touch was nothing, a fraction of contact, yet it sent a spark through Ethan that made his pulse stumble. "I'm fine," Ethan said quickly, though he could hear the crack in his voice. Lucas didn't press, at least not with words. Instead, his hand lingered just close enough that Ethan felt its presence. The air seemed to thicken. Ethan tried to imagine the excuses, the explanations he could later cling to, that he'd been tired, that it had been a misunderstanding, that nothing truly happened. But even as the thoughts formed, he knew they were fragile. Lucas moved again, this time his fingers brushing Ethan's forearm, slow, exploratory. Ethan's breath caught. The gesture was gentle, intimate in a way that left no room for accident. Still, Lucas waited, offering space for resistance. Ethan could have shifted away. He could have broken the moment with a laugh or turned to face the wall. Yet he did none of these things. His body betrayed him, frozen yet leaning inward, craving the very thing he knew he shouldn't want. "You don't stop me," Lucas whispered, his tone carrying both challenge and invitation. Ethan's chest tightened. He thought of Rachel again, her distant kiss before she disappeared into the guest room. The memory collided with the immediacy of Lucas's touch, and for the first time Ethan admitted to himself how starved he was, for warmth, for closeness, for someone to see him. Lucas's hand slid lower, tentative but deliberate, grazing over Ethan's side before hovering just above the point of no return. Ethan's heartbeat thundered, his breath shallow. Each second stretched unbearably, as if the night itself hung in suspense. "Lucas," Ethan whispered, his voice unsteady. He didn't know if it was plea or permission. The name lingered between them, heavy with meaning. Lucas exhaled, a sound that trembled with restraint. His hand pressed lightly, an affirmation that the line had been crossed. Ethan closed his eyes, guilt washing over him, but beneath it surged a current of relief. The barrier he had clung to for years, the one he'd convinced himself was immovable, had finally cracked. Neither spoke for a long while. The room pulsed with quiet, filled only by their uneven breaths. Lucas's hand remained, steady now, no longer testing but claiming. Ethan's body relaxed in surrender, though his mind screamed in conflict. He thought of consequences, the betrayal, the questions, the risk of discovery. Yet none of it felt stronger than the undeniable truth of the moment. He wanted this, had always wanted it, and could no longer pretend otherwise. When Lucas leaned closer, their foreheads nearly touched. Ethan felt the heat of his friend's breath, the intimacy so sharp it bordered on unbearable. He expected words, maybe reassurance, but Lucas gave none. The silence was its own confession. Ethan realized then that nothing about the night was reversible. The choice had been made, not in some dramatic declaration, but in the quiet failure to resist. The world beyond the room seemed to fall away, Rachel's presence down the hall, the life Ethan had carefully constructed, the promises he had once spoken with conviction. All that remained was the pulse in his veins, the hand that lingered on his body, and the certainty that tomorrow would not erase what had begun tonight. The moment stretched, then settled, leaving Ethan trembling in the dark. He wasn't sure what scared him more, that he had betrayed his wife, or that he had discovered a part of himself he could no longer deny, and still, he did not move away. Ethan lay in the dark, the weight of Lucas's hand still resting against him like an unspoken truth. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer the familiar quiet of two old friends sharing space, but a charged stillness, heavy with implication. His chest rose and fell in shallow breaths, each one betraying how much the smallest touch unraveled his composure. Lucas shifted closer, his presence undeniable now, no longer blurred by plausible deniability. Their knees brushed, and neither pulled away. Ethan felt the contact as if it were fire, consuming the flimsy barrier he had clung to for years. "You're not stopping me," Lucas murmured again, softer this time, as though the words themselves might break the spell if spoken too loudly. Ethan opened his mouth to respond, but nothing coherent formed. Every reason to resist, the vows he had made, the wife asleep just a few doors down, the image of himself as a loyal man, collapsed under the weight of longing he had suppressed for too long. His silence became its own admission. Lucas's hand moved with more certainty now, mapping out the familiar yet forbidden terrain of Ethan's body. The touch was steady, deliberate, neither rushed nor hesitant. Ethan closed his eyes, his mind flashing with conflicting images: Rachel's smile when they first met, her hand in his on their wedding day, and then the undeniable pull of the man beside him who knew him differently, who touched him as if every barrier had already been erased. That he wanted to say no. He wanted to reclaim control, to prove to himself that the lines of loyalty still mattered. But when Lucas leaned in, his breath warm against Ethan's ear, a shiver coursed through him that made denial impossible. "This doesn't have to mean anything," Lucas whispered, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Ethan caught the lie instantly. If it meant nothing, it wouldn't feel like this, urgent, tender, dangerous. He exhaled sharply, torn between fear and relief. "It already does," he admitted in a whisper so faint he wasn't sure Lucas had heard him, but Lucas had. Ethan felt the answer not in words but in the way Lucas's hand tightened slightly, anchoring him in the moment. The bed became smaller, the walls closer, as though the universe itself had conspired to trap them here, together, with nowhere to hide. Their closeness deepened, a spiral that drew Ethan further away from the life he had known. He felt each brush of skin like a revelation, every gesture layered with both affection and betrayal. His mind screamed of consequences: Rachel waking, Rachel finding out, Rachel knowing, but his body moved forward, guided by an instinct stronger than fear. Lucas was careful, as though aware of the fragility of Ethan's resolve. He moved slowly, offering pauses that could have been exits. Yet Ethan never took them. Each hesitation only made his eventual surrender more certain. The forbidden nature of their closeness amplified everything: the tension, the heat, the unbearable sweetness of finally giving in. When their foreheads touched, Ethan's resolve fractured completely. He whispered Lucas's name, not as a question this time, but as an invocation. It felt like yielding, like opening a door he had kept locked for years. Lucas answered with silence, but his actions filled the void. He held Ethan with a steadiness that felt both grounding and consuming, as though he understood the depth of the step Ethan was taking. Ethan clung to that steadiness, even as guilt threaded through him like a warning. For a fleeting moment, Ethan thought of Rachel in the next room. The thought stung, a reminder of everything he stood to lose. Yet even that sting was dulled by the intensity of what was unfolding. He realized with startling clarity that his longing for Lucas wasn't new, it had always been there, simmering beneath layers of denial and loyalty. Tonight had only stripped away the excuses, the minutes stretched into something timeless, a blur of breath and touch and unspoken confession. Ethan stopped fighting the contradiction within him, stopped pretending that desire and fidelity could coexist without conflict. He gave himself over to the moment, even as a part of him knew he would regret it when daylight arrived. Lucas whispered something then, so soft it was nearly swallowed by the dark. "I've wanted this for longer than you know." Ethan's heart clenched. The admission cut through the haze, grounding the moment in something far more dangerous than lust. It was not only a crossing of physical boundaries, but of emotional ones. He felt both wrecked and relieved, because it confirmed what he had always suspected yet never dared to acknowledge. The night seemed to breathe with them, holding its breath as if complicit in their secrecy. Every sound from the world outside, a dog barking distantly, the hum of a car on the road, felt unreal, muted. The only reality that mattered was here, now, in this bed where two choices had collided into something irreversible. Ethan's voice was rough when he finally spoke. "I don't know what happens after this." Lucas drew back just enough for Ethan to see the outline of his face in the faint spill of light. "Neither do I. But I know I don't regret this." The words sank deep, heavier than any touch. Ethan wanted to believe them, wanted to trust that this night could exist without unraveling everything else in his life. But even as desire consumed him, the seed of doubt remained. Still, he didn't pull away. His body betrayed him again, leaning closer instead of retreating. Whatever came after, whatever price would be paid, could not outweigh the gravity of the moment itself. The bed felt smaller still, the dark thicker, as Ethan let the last of his resistance fall away. He knew they had crossed into dangerous territory, a place where friendship could not return unchanged. But he also knew there was no turning back, and as Lucas's arms closed around him with a certainty that erased hesitation, Ethan surrendered completely, even as the guilt lingered like a shadow at the edge of his mind.